Welcome back to the Go Have Good Sex podcast, the show where faith and pleasure finally stop fighting. I'm Angela, the Christian sexpert, sex coach, truth teller, and your new favorite bedtime devotional. If you're ready to go deeper, check out my resources for couples and individuals, from my free 15-minute coaching consults to spicy but faith-friendly resources like the Marriage Playdate, to my Patreon, where I teach you all the things your church aunties never told you about. And yeah, you know I've got it covered with merch, journals, bookmarks, and everything in between at thechristiansexpert.com. So whether you're here to learn, to heal, or to spice things up with scripture and sass, I'm your girl, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into today's episode, and remember, go have good sex. Today, we're diving into a form of therapy that has been life-changing for so many people, carrying the weight of trauma, including the kind of wounds that purity culture and church hurt can leave behind. My guest, Erin Pritchard, is a licensed professional clinical counselor, certified EMDR therapist, and approved consultant for the EMDR International Association. She's also a certified fair play facilitator with over 10 years of experience helping individuals and couples thrive in life and love after trauma. Erin specializes in guiding people through the intersections of trauma, sexuality, relationships, and faith. And today, she's helping us understand how EMDR works, why it's so effective for healing, and what hope it offers for those untangling themselves from shame and spiritual wounds. Let's get into it. All right, Erin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited. I have been waiting months to record because when I first saw your Instagram, I was like, I need to talk to her. She's got all the stuff. So, can we start with, first of all, what is EMDR?
It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. And it's an 8-phase treatment protocol that takes a look at the past, the present, and the future, and kind of helps people's brains put memories in a proper storage system. So we're not seeing negative effects of trauma kind of come out sideways after the fact, is kind of a brief way of thinking of it.
Okay, so this sounds a little woo-woo. Uh, so one of the pushbacks that I get a lot is Christians saying, that sounds like Eastern mysticism or something, and Christians shouldn't be doing that. So can Christians participate in EMDR?
Yeah, they can. And I've had some of my coolest EMDR experiences with clients be clients who are Christians because the protocol isn't designed specifically with any particular religious belief system in mind, but for my clients who do know Jesus, it is kind of cool how God will kind of bring himself into some of that time and be really healing for people. So Christians can absolutely do EMDR therapy. I was thinking about this question when I was kind of preparing for our time today, and I was thinking how we're called to be transformed in the renewing of our mind. And really, EMDR, the underlying theory of it is that everybody's brain is wired to integrate our experiences in a way that's positive and adaptive for us. So basically, God designed our brains to work in a certain way where all of our spirit experiences kind of make sense and are working for our good. And when we go through trauma and stressful times, that function is shut off in the brain. So with EMDR therapy, we're just recreating that brain state that your brain would have naturally been able to do that if the experience wasn't overwhelming and that function gets shut off. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
So I have known people who have done EMDR therapy, and um, they, the way that they have explained it is they like focus on a little something like a bouncing ball or something, and they have to follow it with their eyes. And they talk about something that maybe recently happened that left them feeling triggered or angry, upset, or ashamed or anything. And they kind of, while they're following this thing with their eyes, they kind of follow that feeling back throughout their life until they get to sort of an originating childhood experience where they felt the same sort of emotion.
Yeah.
And so, is that like an accurate description of what's happening,
That,
or?
that's pretty good, actually. Yeah. And that's a pretty good example of how, like I said, we take a look at the past, the present, and the future. So sometimes we kind of start with a present thing and it will kind of work its way back to something old. Sometimes we start with something old, kind of work moving forward. So yeah, but the maybe the dot you're describing, we give people's brains something else to pay attention to. It's called the dual attention stimulus because your brain basically has one foot in the present, like right here, right now, and one foot thinking about whatever the memories are that you're reprocessing. So we have kind of that dual attention. So the lights, or some people will listen to like an alternating sound in each of their ears. And some people will do like tapping. So sometimes there's like a tactile thing. So any of those things, we're just giving your brain something else to pay attention to get that dual attention going.
So, one of the conversations that I see happening a lot on TikTok and other social media, because my algorithm just doesn't know what to do with me, because like it's like, well, you're not a therapist, you're a coach, but you talk about therapist-y things on your podcast, and also you're a Christian, but you talk about sex, and you're kink friendly, but you are a Christian. And so I wind up on the craziest rabbit holes on my social media because the algorithms just don't know what to do. And so one of actually the recent ones that I have wound up on is people talking about not having a lot of success with traditional talk therapy, and
Mm.
how they just felt like talk therapy never really worked for them because they intellectualize their emotions instead of feeling their emotions. And so if someone is more of an intellectualizer of their emotions, would EMDR be a good fit over talk therapy?
It would. Yes, overall, yes, because it works with the brain in a very different way than talk therapy. Talk therapy is a bottom down approach. So we're starting up here with like a really cognitive space, like using your frontal lobe. And that has a time and a place, and that's wonderful. But EMDR kind of works the opposite way. So we're starting with like the more visceral responses, the body responses, the really physiological stuff, and then we're kind of working our way to something adaptive, which is how your brain is designed and how it grows, right? Like, so we grow with, when we're like little babies, we have just like bare bones of a brain, and then our frontal lobe is like the last part to develop, right? So it grows from the bottom up, and that is going to work best when we have experiences like trauma or like something overwhelming, or if you're feeling stuck in talk therapy and feels like I just keep going and I just keep talking, 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 nothing gets better. Um, then EMDR could be a really good option.
So this is totally off the script that I sent you, but look at us. We made it three questions in before I was like, "Oh, this is better." Um
Yeah.
so this is reminding me that like one of the things that I talk a lot about is women are consistently socialized from a young age to not live in our bodies, that we are socially conditioned to live in our brains and disconnect from our bodies. And we see this showing up because the first time a girl gets her period, it's, oh, well, oh, you have terrible cramps. Well, you still have to go to school, pull an Elsa, conceal, don't feel, right?
Yeah.
But then nobody teaches us how to reconnect to our bodies. And then we get to the bedroom with our husbands, and suddenly we don't know how to even orgasm because we are so disconnected that we don't feel pain or pleasure
Yeah.
consistently. So if a woman is consistently living in that, like she feels like she's in that disconnected state, if she's feeling like, well, I go to the bedroom with my husband and I just can't get out of my head, I can't seem to enjoy sex because I'm just so in my head about it, would EMDR be a good place to start to kind of restore a connection?
Yeah, yeah. And like I said earlier, it is 8 phases. So some of the prep work is exactly what you're talking about. We need to make sure that people are able to at least a little bit tune into some sort of body sensation in the moment. which is also a skill useful for the bedroom and having good sex and having that be pleasurable, or noticing if you're experiencing pain and then doing something differently about that. So yeah, some of that is definitely part of the prep work that we do before some of the reprocessing phases with the light bar or the sound.
Great.
Yeah.
So, kind of in that same line, one of the things that we are starting to see more conversations about when we're talking about trauma is there's this sort of big T trauma, but then there's little T trauma. I feel like little T trauma has been sort of dismissed for a long time
Mhm.
and is like not that serious. And people are starting to realize that continuous little T traumas kind of add up to big T trauma over time. And so, to give people sort of a context for what I'm talking about, like when we think of like big T trauma, we think of like veterans returning home from war, is, everybody recognizes that's a big T trauma, right? Or if you were sexually assaulted, that would be a like that one night would be like a big T trauma. But the series of little T traumas are things like purity culture messaging, could be a consistent line of little T traumas, or like a series of bullying incidents in school where it's not, nobody's getting suspended for a week, but it's, constant little remarks from classmates or things like that. And we can see evidence of this in how, we have the study that women raised in purity culture are twice as likely to experience female sexual dysfunction as their non-purity culture counterparts. And so, like, there wasn't a one big traumatic event for purity culture survivors, but they're still experiencing that physical evidence of big trauma. And I get pushback all the time when I talk about purity culture as trauma. So can you explain, can you first of all, break down how purity culture actually did inflict trauma, little t trauma,
Yeah.
repeatedly for an entire generation?
Yeah. And I think something important for this conversation really is trauma is a spectrum. So, and it's subjective. So, something that is traumatic for one person or is traumatic for one person at one particular age may or may not be for another person or another person at that same age. So we also have to kind of think trauma is a spectrum. It's not just like a black and white yes or no. I'm also thinking, some people, based on their experiences in purity culture, some people would say that it's a big T trauma for them. So kind of depends on who you ask, but definitely when we have like lots of those little traumas, repeated, constant, chronic stress, it does have the same effect in the brain. So when we're talking about trauma in general, to quote one of my teachers, trauma, the Greek word for wound. So I think that is just so profound when we think of it that way and kind of remember that trauma equals wound. And so if we're talking about wounds, there's big wounds, right? Even if we're talking about physical wounds, there's like a whole range of what that could mean and look like. If I, get my entire arm chopped off, that's very different than like when I got stabbed gardening this weekend, right? Like there's a big range of stuff. But trauma is anything, it's less about what happened and it is more about how your brain, your body, and your nervous system responded to what happened. So we can kind of think of the spectrum of trauma of anything that's too much, too soon, too intense, not enough, totally lacking something. So I think that that's like kind of a helpful context for like continuing some of this question about like how is purity culture trauma? Because when we're thinking about, too much, too soon, not enough of something, we have not enough sexual information, not enough medically accurate sexual information, not enough information about healthy relationships and those dynamics, too much emphasis on when should sex be had, not enough emphasis on how and pleasure and good things, right? So there's a lot of those too much, too soon, not enough qualities in all of the different components of purity culture experiences, especially for women, I think.
For sure. I'm thinking this reminds me of one of the things that Dr. Anita Phillips said at the Women Evolve conference that I was at in 2024. And she's a trauma therapist, and she was talking about how you can have sexual abuse trauma without ever being touched.
Mhm.
Because if your parents did said things that were too much, not enough,
Mhm.
too much responsibility, things like that, that if it negatively impacted your own relationship with your sexual self,
Yeah.
then that's a form of sexual abuse trauma without ever being touched.
Yeah.
And she talked about not giving kids more responsibility than they have the power to exert.
Sure.
So things like I know that Uncle Johnny, if he ever touches you, you tell me because I'm gonna, we're gonna throw him in jail or, but that is too much
Sure.
for a small child to think that, well, I don't want him to go to jail, right?
Yeah.
Versus just if anybody touches you, talk to me, and the different ways to have those conversations. And so I
Yeah.
definitely see what you're talking about with, purity culture emphasizing, especially to girls, that, their bodies could condemn men to hell and, telling 8-year-olds their bodies are intoxicating and,
Yeah. Too much, too
too
soon.
much, way too much.
The
You,
other thing too is also people can have sexual responses to trauma, even if the trauma isn't at all sexual in nature. So to kind of
mm-hmm,
go off of that, people can have trauma changes your worldview of yourself, other people, and kind of like the general world around you. And totally normal to have a wide range of responses sexually, even if the trauma has nothing to do with sex or your body. Same thing with spiritually, wide range of spiritual responses possible also. And purity culture is kind of unique because does fall under the category both of sexual trauma and religious trauma. So it's kind of this two for one deal.
yeah. Can you give some examples of like concrete examples of what you might be talking about here?
With trauma responses?
Yeah, yeah. Especially because people can have, you said that they can have sexual responses to the trauma and, or spiritual responses. So like, can you
Yeah.
give
Yeah.
kind of frame that a little less, a little more in layman's
Yeah. Yeah.
layman's terms?
My favorite strategy. Yeah, so we can, so usually when people have any sort of trauma responses, we're again going to see something usually on a spectrum. So for some people, that's going to look like doing a lot of something. And for some people, that's going to look like doing like little of something as possible, avoidance, right?
Hmm.
And also, your response is not stagnant. So you might have one response where you're doing a lot of something, and then your brain kind of learns, ooh, this isn't really good for me. And then kind of trickles over here and does more of the avoidance piece. So, what that could look like spiritually, maybe someone is ramping up going to church or going to church more times or praying more times. Or maybe the flip side, they're avoiding the Lord. They don't want to have conversations. They're never stepping foot in a church ever again. Hell no, don't ever ask me to go. So it can kind of look like anywhere in that spectrum. Sexually, people can become hypersexual. A lot of times it's the brain kind of trying to heal something that happened in either direction, really, trying to kind of recreate an opportunity and heal something that happened and try to make it go differently. So people can become hypersexual or engage in risky sexual behaviors. Or on the other end of the spectrum, people can become really disinterested in sex, not even interested in dating. Um, does that kind of help explain?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I want to make sure that we aren't focusing just on purity culture trauma here, especially because another sort of trauma that has people are really talking about now is church hurt and spiritual abuse.
Mhm.
So, can you give us some examples of how that sort of trauma might, because when we think about like church hurt or spiritual abuse, we don't really think about how that would necessarily show up in your body because it's like the purity culture leaving women more likely to experience female sexual dysfunction kind of makes sense, right? Because if you're shamed, if you're the majority of your connections when sex is discussed is shame and fear, it makes sense that there's going to be a sexual dysfunction response in the body. But
Yeah.
when we talk about like church hurt or spiritual abuse, it's kind of hard to conceptualize how that might show up in our body, but all trauma shows up in our body. So, what are some ways that you have
Yeah.
seen that that shows up in the body?
Yeah, all trauma shows up in the body, and also our brain does not know the difference between what type of trauma we're going through. So it's going to show up in the body in very similar ways, kind of no matter what we're enduring. So I think of a study, this is a long time ago at this point, but there was one that I read where the kids who just heard domestic violence, they didn't see it, didn't witness it, they just heard it. They had the same scans show up on their brain, indicating PTSD as someone who came back from war in a combat zone. So our brain really cannot tell the difference. It has no idea. It's wired to respond to any threat as if it's right here, right now, whether it's actually happening or we're just like thinking about it happening, and it can't tell. Um, so with that in mind, we would see a lot of the same responses to uh, different types of church trauma that we would see to other traumas. So things like we look for either intrusive symptoms, so we're adding something to the brain, so we're not trying to think about it, and then just having this terrible thought and memory or image kind of pop up in my head, or avoidance symptoms. So I'm not going to think about it, not going to talk about it, not going to pray about it, not going to do anything. So kind of avoidance symptoms. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go down this street. I'm not going to talk to this person. Um, Other things, if we're not, this kind of goes back to you talking about intellectualizing, but if we're not moving through our emotions, they come out very physically a lot of times. So, like muscle tension and tightness and stress, physical illness, your whole digestive system shuts off when you are going through stress. So it actually doesn't matter to the brain if we call it stress, trauma, anxiety, whatever we call it, your brain response is the same. So your digestive system, the whole thing, top to bottom all shuts down. So you can imagine the GI responses to that, feeling nauseous, upset stomach, bad poops, all the things, right? Um, yeah, we can have relational responses, feeling irritable, not feeling like you have a voice and really withdrawing, really acquiescing to other people, not making your needs known and met. So there's a wide range of like all sorts of different types of responses that people can have, kind of no matter what the trauma is. I think for some of the spiritual ones, because of the power dynamics and because of the greater implication, like it's so existential, right? If it really can wreak havoc on people's view of God or their spiritual state or their willingness to participate in a community or being open to accurate interpretations of scripture later on if it's been misused against them.
So, how I'm kind of cracking up at all of the listeners right now that are like, wait, should I be discussing my GI stuff with my therapist?
Yes, you
Like
should.
that are
Yeah.
just like having this revelation for the first time. Um, Obviously, like I know you're probably not seeing exclusively Christian therapy clients, but
Mhm.
how do you sort of integrate faith and EMDR and helping, if someone has church hurt or spiritual abuse, like how are you practically supporting someone who is working on those things with you?
Sure. Yeah, those are good questions. I mean, as part of, my first couple of sessions with clients when I'm getting to know them, I'm asking questions about their spiritual beliefs, about, have those changed since you were a kid? Is that something that you grew up with? Does your family or friends have any differences in spiritual beliefs and opinions that cause, disruptions in your life. So I'm asking a lot of questions about some of those. I usually ask everybody, to what extent do you want conversations around faith to be part of this process? Because I'm trained as a secular therapist, and so it's not really my job or my role to, I'm not a pastor, so I'm not intending to put that on anyone or anything. So I want to be really cautious with that, and I just try to give people lots of different choices, lots of different options to change their mind later and have that be okay and safe to do so. It's kind of a little bit of a nebulous answer, but those are the first thoughts kind of coming to my mind. If people want to be, it also kind of comes out in, what resources will I recommend to people? If I know that someone does not believe in God anymore, I'm not going to recommend the book that's got some spiritual things in there. I'm going to recommend a different one. So I'm not going to like sneak some faith in there at people if I know that they have, hurt in this area, especially or ever, but especially if they've got some hurt.
Yeah.
I'm going to be really mindful of like, what am I, directing them to for things outside of our time together.
Well, that brings up a great question. Do you have any books that you like to recommend for spiritual abuse or church hurt for
I,
people that are believers? Because I have primarily, my target audience is believers.
yeah, I have some, and to be honest, I would need to go look at my list of books and uh, give it to you later because off the top of my head, today is not the day for that.
No, oh, girl, my brain fog is also the worst today. So we will put those recommendations in the show notes for you.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
No problem. Okay, so one of the phrases that people will hear in conjunction with EMDR therapy is memory reconsolidating. So
Mhm.
that's a really big, fancy psychological word. Can you tell
Uh-huh.
us what that really means in normal
Yeah,
people speak?
yeah. Think of a filing cabinet. Okay. If you took like a bunch of papers and you just like threw them across your desk, they're not put in this filing cabinet, right? They're strewed about your desk in a way that may or may not make sense, probably doesn't. So when we're reconsolidating them, we're putting them in files and we're putting them in the cabinet where they make more sense. That would be like a good visual way to kind of think about that process.
So when we're thinking about someone that's coming in for EMDR, when they're first coming in, they are walking in with all of the papers all over the desk.
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
And it's probably a little bit of that time that they got yelled at for eating their food too messy, and also that time that their youth pastor told them that they were the same as chewed gum if they didn't go to their wedding night a virgin, and probably the time that somebody in fourth grade called them a name, and so there it's probably like the papers are all
They're all over.
different
Yeah.
traumas that they have experienced.
Hmm.
Okay, so if you were working on specifically like purity culture beliefs
Hmm.
with an EMDR client, so how would that like memory reconsolidating? How would that work in replacing those purity culture scripts with something healthier?
Yeah. So what we're ultimately looking to do, sometimes I kind of describe it as like your past is coming out sideways, right? So like I'm being short with my husband because something happened at work, right? So it's like not coming out in an appropriate way. Um, so usually people will have like an idea of like, oh yeah, I have these, relational issues, or here's kind of my take on sex. They'll be able to kind of piece some things together. The first couple of phases look and feel like go into most other therapy. So if you've been in talk therapy before, you're just getting to know one another. You're kind of building that relational container of safety. You are sharing a little bit about your story and the history of that's there and kind of what you want to work on. Um, and then as we kind of move through some of the phases, you know, the memory reconsolidation, that's just like what happens. This is not like an it's intentional, but like that's my job to worry about. That's not like a client's job to be concerned with, are my memories reconsolidated now? Like, am I good? So I don't really, for me, I don't really, I'll teach people a little bit about like kind of the general stages of EMDR so they can have an idea of like a roadmap that we're going on. But it's disruptive to the EMDR process to be like, and now we're entering phase 4, and now we're in phase 5. We don't want to do that. So um, you know, EMDR is kind of different. The therapist really stays out of it a lot more than with talk therapy. So, um, I don't usually have to understand people's stories. I care and I want to, but we're really letting your brain do the work versus if you're like explaining your story, it takes your brain out of that space where it can do the filing cabinet stuff itself. So what we're looking to do is kind of neutralize memories. So we can say that they happened, they're here in the past, but it's not bringing up like a physiological, like big body response to it. There's no pit in your stomach, there's no flutter, you're not shaky, you're not, flushed, you're just like neutral. The same as if I asked, like, what did you have for lunch today? If it was, just, yeah, a sandwich. Like, it wasn't the best, it wasn't the worst, it just was a sandwich. Like, neutral. So we want to neutralize memories. And when we do that, then the brain kind of flips and does this really cool thing and eventually throws something more positive and adaptive out there. So relating all this to purity culture, your original question, we are looking for what are the negative beliefs about yourself from going through this experience. And we're looking to have your brain believe something more true, more positive. So an example would be, I'm dirty to I'm whole, or I'm allowed to be sexual, or I can embrace my sexuality for that.
That's one of the I don't know if this is the right word, consequences that I see a lot with my purity culture survivors is the just not feeling safe to be sexual. And so to have something that could lead to them feeling safe to express their sexuality would be really important for them.
Mhm. Yeah.
Which is also why, if you all come to me for coaching and, we're talking, I'm probably going to be like, love to work with you, but I also need for you to either see a therapist in conjunction with me or see a therapist for a bit and then come see me and we can talk about
Mhm.
the fun stuff. So, depending on what you are wanting to work with me for, I might send you off to someone like Erin first to get some therapy under your belt and then come back to me for okay, now we can spice it up. Now we can, now that you feel safe to be sexual,
Yeah.
let's talk about all the fun things that you can do sexually.
Yeah.
Um, Sort of not putting the cart before the horse with working through those things. Um, okay.
Yeah, sometimes we can kind of jump to the fun stuff and it's almost like a Band-Aid and that
Mm-hmm.
will have an opposite
Yes.
effect and kind of recreate not feeling safe and recreate more of a sense of pressure. So definitely if
Yes.
you're having physiological responses coming up when you're thinking about sex, you're thinking about being intimate, you're thinking about yourself as a sexual person, anything like that, if you notice like, like just like a physical sense with that, go get you some EMDR. Go like
Yes.
neutralize that and then
Yes.
go do something else.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And um that's why I really like to talk to people before they jump in with me because I want to make like I don't want to just take your guys' money. Like I want to make sure that any work that you did with me wouldn't be the money wouldn't be better served going into therapy first.
Yeah.
So that's why if you ever contacted me, I might have said, hey, go see my friend Erin first and then come back. Um, because we have to be purity culture has just done such a number and the way that it even permeated out into pop culture, I think there's a lot of people that are more affected by it than they consciously realize.
Oh, yeah.
Um, So this one, when I put this question on here, one of my friends just started with her own therapist, and I think she was like on her second or third session or something. And she sent a text to the group chat, and she's like, "Well, off to therapy. Turns out I wasn't the magic bullet, and I'm not cured already, so this is dumb." Um, um, and I think of people who have not yet embarked on a therapy journey don't realize that the first few sessions, like you don't feel better after after them. Like you might even be a little frustrated because it's like, well, that just seemed like a waste of time. And so I put this on here because I think, well, first of all, Christians, there's a far too large segment of Christians that are anti-psychology at all. And so if you are working on coming out of that sort of a system and you're unfamiliar with what any sort of therapeutic process looks like, the first two, three sessions really don't feel like it feels like you just might have wasted money, honestly, because you're like, what? Like, can we do something? So I really want people to have a reasonable expectation. The point that I am circling is I want people to have a reasonable expectation if they have never gone to therapy before, if they don't have any experience with EMDR, like what does that first session look like? And why is it so important to power through those first couple of sessions, even if you have that sense of like, ugh, it just doesn't feel like we're getting anywhere?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, really the first whole phase of therapy, which can take a while, it can take weeks, really. Um, but that whole first phase, especially those first couple of initial sessions, you are just getting to know one another. You're just sharing your story. You are giving your history. You're giving enough history that we can, come up with a diagnosis if that's appropriate, or come up with like a plan for treatment that's going to make sense. And sometimes we can get through that in one or two sessions. Some people, depending on your age or the amount of stuff you've kind of been through, it can take a lot longer, or also depending on how stable are things currently, because I can't ask too many questions about your past and growing up and where you're from and childhood and some of those things if the present is not stable and is just too much. So yeah, your first couple of sessions, you'll fill out paperwork before you go. And then first couple of sessions is just kind of giving your history, helping the therapist understand a little bit just who you are as a person, what's going on, and what do you wish was going on instead. So kind of like where do you want to be instead of whatever is happening right now. And it can take a while to feel comfortable.
For sure. And also, if you are using insurance to cover your therapy, last I was aware, pretty much all insurances require a diagnosis and a treatment plan.
Yeah.
So, um, that is a thing that we
Yeah.
have to deal with.
Yeah, it's definitely there's pros and cons to that. If you are using insurance, they will make you have a diagnosis on your record. Your therapist will probably give what we call the least restrictive one, um, meaning that that's the one that's least likely to carry long-term potential negative outcomes to you, for it being on your record, but no insurance will reimburse any therapy without a diagnosis. So if you are going to therapy and using insurance, you have a diagnosis, whether or not your therapist has talked about it with you, and they should talk about it with you. And there's sometimes when getting one is appropriate because we treat OCD very differently than we treat generalized anxiety, right? So we need to have some sort of diagnosis so that we know how do we respond appropriately and effectively to these symptoms and how do we make people feel better. So, um, so there can be pros to that and cons to that as well, which I could talk about for a long time, but I don't need to get into that. But definitely have a conversation about, if you don't want one on your record, using cash or self-pay would be your option for that. And if that's not an option, having a conversation about what's the least restrictive diagnosis.
I have I bring these things up because these are all objections that I have seen and heard to Christians specific. It seems to be a thing with mostly in some Christian circles,
Mhm.
um, certainly the more fundamentalist circles of,
Yeah.
seeking therapy, seeking treatment. Um, it- that's a rabbit hole that I'm going to try and use some self-control to not take us down.
Yeah.
But I really want to make it clear that having a diagnosis is not, nobody's calling your employer and being like, oh my gosh, Mary, has depression and, so like we need to take away, whatever,
Yeah.
from them. Like
Unless,
that's not a diagnosis is not, it's giving you access to help.
sure.
It's
Yeah.
not some label that's going to, follow you around.
Well, it can. So we can talk about that if we need to, but it
I
can. But if people are using EAP, then their employer might see a diagnosis. There's some other things which I can go into, but in general, I mean, also if you go to the doctor for a runny nose or something, or like I had to go get a tetanus shot this weekend because I cut myself in my garden, right, on rusty metal. So, when you go show up for any sort of healthcare, there's always some sort of diagnosis. If you go in with a runny nose, sinusitis, right? So there's always
Yeah.
a diagnosis if insurance payment is involved.
I'm thinking, and yes, and there are certain circumstances where, like if you're going into the military, they're going to dig up any sort of diagnosis or things like that. But I'm talking about like people that are like, oh, if I go to a psychologist, they're going to find out that I have depression and somebody's going to show up and take my personal firearms or
Yeah.
no,
Here's the,
that's
yeah,
that's not really a thing that's
no.
gonna, I'm talking more about like yeah. And there are some very specific circumstances in which, you know, a diagnosis may impact employment or something like that. But
Sure.
mm, mm, the odds are not, the odds are it's not going to have some sort of large impact on your life. Um, but it's, see, there's the rabbit hole, and I just
Well,
dive in.
and
Okay.
a lot of symptoms though, like if you're engaging in the right treatment, which is this is why a diagnosis can
Yeah.
be important. If you're getting the right treatment for that thing, your symptoms go away. So like
Right.
there's a small number of more severe diagnoses that do not leave because they are persistent. That's okay. That is what that is for those. But the larger thing that people are going to go in for, your depression, anxiety, trauma, even those symptoms go away. You no longer meet criteria for a diagnosis, and then you don't have it anymore. So you're not stuck
Right.
with it forever, most
Right.
likely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I actually was listening to someone today talking about how their BPD was considered in remission because they did the work in therapy, which is huge.
Mhm.
So, okay, I'm gonna drag us away because I have so many things that I have seen said about this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Can I,
if
oh, sorry.
yeah,
Can
no,
I
go for it.
back real quick and kind of clarify one thing about like
Yeah.
the thoughts with EMDR?
Oh,
Because
yeah, absolutely.
I do think this is important to just clarify. Like we're working towards your brain having more positive thoughts, more adaptive, more true thoughts, right? That doesn't mean like toxic positivity thinking. We're not like cognitively forcing this into your brain.
Mm,
What EMDR helps do is kind of bridge that gap between like your head knowledge of yourself and your heart knowledge, or like your gut, whatever you prefer to think of. So, like, for purity culture and sex, we might have the cognitive awareness of like, this is okay, it's good, even, it can be fun, but I don't really deeply don't believe it. I don't think it's for me. So, we can kind of bridge that gap, right, and have a more positive, like, gut belief or heart belief that, oh, yeah, it's okay that I'm a sexual person. That's cool. So like it's not it's these truths kind of sink in at a deeper level than just like it's not a platitude.
yeah. That's so important. That's one of my pet peeves is, we you can't saying this like it just goes hand in hand. Like well, you shouldn't speak that over your life. You have to claim healing.
Yeah.
Um, that goes hand in hand with the, diagnosis and not toxic positivity because there's an acknowledgement and there's a claiming. All right, I gotta get it together. Okay, so um well, this actually leads into this question. One of the things that I run into is people saying that any sort of therapy is unbiblical and we need to rely on God to heal us. So, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. I mean, therapy is not going to work if you are not participatory in the process. So just like going to therapy isn't going to be helpful. You usually have to do some sort of work on your own. But I mean, gosh, there's lots of stuff that we do, use, engage in, experience that's unbiblical or not explicitly in the Bible. Like, do you drive a car? Is that biblical? I don't know. Like, there's lots of stuff that's not explicitly in there, right? But
It's,
we also see like lots of examples of God working through the culture and the people and what is available at the time. So I think this is a big area where we need, I wish more Christians had like a shade of gray thinking about this. It's kind of a false dichotomy to think either Jesus or healing, right? Or conventional medicine or conventional therapy or whatever. We can, maybe those are the means through which God wants to provide healing. So if you're resistant to going to the therapy, you might be keeping yourself from what God has in store for you for healing. And that's really sad, honestly.
yeah, I get it's the same sort of argument I get a lot on my socials is if I talk about vibrators on my socials, people will be like, vibrators aren't biblical. Well, neither is Facebook, Susan, but here you are on Facebook telling me that vibrators aren't biblical.
Yeah.
So it's the same sort of arguments.
Right.
Um,
But also,
for
yeah,
sure.
just because something is in the Bible, like rape is in the Bible. Do we say that
Right.
biblical? No, we say that that is not how God wants his beloved people treated. No. So just because something's in there doesn't mean that it is promoted or promoted in a
Yeah.
good way, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
just because something isn't specifically addressed doesn't mean that it is endorsed or prohibited either
Mhm.
way.
Yeah.
Um, so, okay, so how does someone know if EMDR is right for them or if another modality would be better suited?
That's a good question. If you have never, 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 ever been to therapy before, EMDR might feel like too much for you, to be very honest, because it's weird. It's different. Like if you were and I were doing EMDR right now, it's so much less of a conversation. So it does feel weird to be in the
And
client role doing EMDR.
honestly, I know someone who kind of had repressed a lot of trauma. Like there was yeah, my childhood was rough, but
Mhm.
it was fine, sort of response. And I after their first EMDR session, they said I had no idea that I had that much stored trauma. And everyone said, hmm, really? Hmm. So
Yeah.
EMDR is definitely, from what I have seen of those that have participated, is
Mhm.
definitely can feel more, I don't know if aggressive is the right. I think it seems like it brings up a lot more stuff a lot faster.
It does. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because you're working with how your brain naturally moves information around. So and that's why some of those earlier phases are really important. A good EMDR therapist is not going to rush someone into some of those later reprocessing phases because that is a risk. We the point isn't to uncover memories, but that can happen sometimes. And sometimes with EMDR or other therapy, just in general, things can get worse and feel worse before they feel better. So you're kind of like walking into a mud pit and then walking out. So, um,
Well,
definitely.
and it's like if burn victim needs their wounds, what's the fancy word for it? You got to clean the burn
Oh,
skin off,
sure.
right? So, and that's more painful than just letting it live there.
Yeah. But also on the flip side, some people are like, I want to go to therapy and I don't want to talk about stuff. And for those people, EMDR can also be a great first option because the amount of stuff you have to tell me is so minimal that sometimes people just like don't even believe me. Like one client that just like had such a profound experience. I barely know what she was working on. Like I have a rough idea, but I do not know the full story. I do not know the specifics. And she was actually a Christian client, so God kind of came into that time, which was really cool. But I don't know. I have no idea what her story was, and that's okay because my brain doesn't need to know it. It's her brain that needs to do that work and kind of put stuff in an order. So if you really don't want to go to talk, if talking about things, if that feels overwhelming and you'd rather like feel it, if you are able to feel your emotions, if you are able to kind of notice body sensations, EMDR is a good start for that too.
So, how does someone find a therapist that can practice EMDR? Because not every therapist can practice it.
No, we need lots and lots of extra training for a long time to do that. So the best way would be to go onto the EMDR International Association, EMDRIA. It's emdria.org. To go onto there, find a therapist directory. If you're using another directory, make sure you like filter the search results by your location, your insurance, and EMDR if that gives you that option. So one of those two would be the best way.
Or if you're in Ohio, just hit up Erin.
Come see me. I'm super great. Yeah, come see me if you are in Ohio. And hopefully there's a counseling compact passing hopefully soon. So I might be able to do that with people in more states than Ohio soon. We'll see.
I hope so.
I really hope so.
I
Yeah.
really hope so too, because I have started a spreadsheet of therapists that I trust to send my followers to send, potential people that have reached out for coaching. And I'm like, oh, you don't need coaching, baby girl. You need to go to therapy.
Yeah.
Right. And I started cultivating this list of therapists that I actually trust because there aren't a lot of therapists that, understand purity culture trauma
Yeah.
or the nuance of church hurt or spiritual abuse and things like that. And it would be lovely if my trusted therapists like you on
Mhm.
my list could cover more states because right now I just have a small handful of states that
Sure.
that I have resources for people at. So side note, if you have a therapist that you're like, this is my therapist and I completely like they have completely helped me with purity culture or church hurt or spiritual abuse, like feel free to email me so I can investigate because
I'll get back to
I would love to have more resources that I can help followers with to find safe therapy because and this honestly this all started about the same time that you and I connected. I think it was the same weekend. I had a follower reach out to me and tell me that she and her husband had been in therapy and um, one of the big issues was sex. And she realized through watching my content that her husband was sexually coercive
you.
and was engaging in sexually coercive behaviors with her. And when she took it to their therapist that they had been seeing, the therapist said, well, until you, referring to the female victim in this case, until you are able to get over this block about sex, I don't see how you guys can move forward.
No,
Um,
no, no,
so
no. Yeah.
she reached out to me and said, I need I need a new therapist. Do you have someone that you can recommend? And that was, and I kind of toyed with the idea of, starting this spreadsheet before that, but that was kind of the weekend where I was like, okay, I need a list that I can refer to and find safe therapists for people who are being victimized by therapists.
Yeah.
Um, so I had a lot of choice words for
Yeah.
her,
That's
and
really sad.
she had a lot of choice words for me. And because I think I texted both you and Ashley Hudson, who's been on the podcast as well. And I was like, do you guys have a therapist in this state that you trust? And I think one of you actually did. And that was so great, because I was able to get her connected to someone, and I should follow up with her. So this is what a podcast with me is just, every ADHD trail that we can take. All right.
With you.
So
Okay.
one of the things that, speaking of therapists and connections, you have created resources for therapists for purity culture trauma, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where can people go to find, where can someone go to find those?
Yeah, so if you are a therapist, if you are trained in EMDR, you can go to my website, seagllassohio.com, and I've got a cognitions list, I've got a blocking beliefs list, and a couple other things for EMDR therapists who maybe aren't as familiar with purity culture to start using some of these tools with purity culture survivors, so that we can do more effective EMDR with folks.
Awesome. And you're going to come back in a month or two, and you're going to talk about fair play.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So if anyone is looking for a fair play coach, they don't have to be in Ohio, right? You can take them as a fair play
Yeah.
coaching client from anywhere, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. If you and your
Okay.
spouse are looking for help figuring out your domestic labor, your household chores, your conversations around them, if laundry is causing fights, come find me. We'll make that better.
Yes. Yeah. And we are going to have an episode about mental load, domestic labor, emotional labor, and the Fair Play book and system here in a couple of months. So make sure that you come back for that episode. But if you are familiar with the Fair Play system, you've seen it talked about on social media, and you are like, I feel like we could benefit from a Fair Play coach, hit up Erin's website because she can help you with
Yeah.
that before the episode comes out. So, all right. Do you have any last thoughts that you want to leave with our listeners?
I think, especially if you are nervous about starting therapy, if you're wanting to do EMDR, be flexible on whether or not the person is personally a Christian. Just like you, if you needed heart surgery, probably wouldn't care or mind what their spiritual beliefs and practices were. This is kind of an area to operate in the same manner. A good EMDR therapist is going to support your beliefs and, not impose theirs on yours. And there's a very, very, very small number of people who uh, are trained in that overlap of purity culture, sex therapy, EMDR. I'm literally one of the only people. So there's a very small number of people. So be flexible on, this person doesn't need to be a Christian themselves as long as they are faith affirming for you. That is important. So don't
I
get
think,
hung up on I need it to be a Christian therapist
yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah, that's one of my big things when I am encouraging people to go to therapy is they're like, well, I want a Christian therapist. No, you want a licensed therapist
You want a good
before
one.
well, clearly the story that I just told you indicates that not all licensed therapists are good
Right.
ones.
That's why I said
Um,
a good one,
yeah,
not just a
yeah,
licensed
but
one.
also my criteria when I'm helping when I'm talking to a follower or a potential coaching client about seeking therapy is make sure that this person is licensed. Like that's like the bare minimum is if you're
Mhm.
going for therapy, find a licensed therapist. If they say something off the wall, like you are the paying client. You can ask for clarity because look, they're also human.
Mhm.
Sometimes things don't come out of mouths the way that we intend them to come out of mouths.
Yeah.
So, give them an opportunity to clarify, but if they double down on whatever, walk out. dude, find a different, there is a therapist out there. But
Yeah.
all
Yep.
right. Thank you so much for helpfully demystifying therapy and EMDR, and go have good sex. I hope this conversation has given you a clearer picture of how EMDR therapy can be a powerful tool for healing from the impact of purity culture and church hurt. If you want to connect with Erin, learn more about her work, or explore therapy or coaching options, check out the links in the show notes. Remember, you're not broken, you're not beyond healing, and your story isn't over. Until next time, go have good sex. That's it for today's episode. You've been blessed and probably slightly scandalized. Now, go journal, go text your man, and most of all, don't keep this to yourself. Share it, review it, slide into my DMs. Then grab a journal, a game, or a coaching spot. And remember, Jesus didn't die for you to have boring sex. So go have good sex already.